Hello, everybody. I'm Burt with New Life CFO Services, and I wanted to thank you for carving out some of your valuable time and participating in our educational forums here. Today, we're going to be talking about dealing with uncertainty. God knows we got a lot of it going on right now, politically, socially, economically, globally. It's all over the place, it seems like. But what does that mean for your business, and how are you prepared for it? And what does that look like to be prepared? Those are the topics we're going to cover today. If you've been following with us, you've probably seen that we've already done a couple of videos on this as far as an overview, and then really diving into some of the revenue aspects of this. Today's topic is going to be much broader, but I'm going to encourage you, if you hear things that are of interest or applicable to you, then give us a contact. Go to our website, says I would like to learn more, and we will reach out to you. It's no harm, no foul, no commitment, and we'll spend some time with you to explore these topics in greater detail. With that said, let's dive in and start moving forward. So as it comes to uncertainty, wow, there's a lot of topics. Back before the election or earlier in the year, is it Trump versus Biden? Wildly different agendas. There's still wildly different agendas out there. Tariffs and trade. As we go into the Christmas season, that's becoming a huge issue because so many of our retailers, so many of our suppliers, so much of the supply chains and channels really are still in flux and don't know what to do about the tariffs and passing through the prices. But that's going to be really interesting is getting into Christmas season when people start to feel more of the prices. So if your business is affected by the retail or you're a part of that supply chain, you might want to take specific note. Obviously, China is a big question mark. It becomes more and more so. In my personal opinion, China was a great trade partner until they became antagonistic and more politically power hungry than they were trade power hungry. Now they're being seen more and more as an adversary. So what does that mean as far as trade with China, onshoring, nearshoring, moving productivity or production to other countries? They're just friendlier to the United States and the West as a whole. As we go through there, we went through about a stagflation. Will that return, especially with the impacts of tariffs and Doge? Lots of cuts were proposed in the first 6 months. Some of those are being enacted. Some of those were just talked about. But what if Doge becomes a reality and a normal ongoing part of the process? A part of me celebrates that. Part of me knows that that's going to cause big disruptions. And then Ukraine. Let's face it, that's the biggest topic in the news right now is what's going on with Ukraine. Does that war expand? Does by some miracle, does that get to peaceful talks, which given what Putin's done right after the talks that have been had, that doesn't seem likely. So that's a huge caveat. And what are the ripple effects going to be on there? Interest rates, up, down, pressure on the Fed, who knows? But we do know that they're going to be moving. More recently, it looks like they're moving down, but as some of these other things come up, especially stagflation and the impacts of tariffs, what will that do to interest rates? We already saw that interest rates increased in commercial real estate. It had devastating effects on the real estate investments. Interest rates went through the roof, returns collapsed, and so did those investors. All those things have ripple effects in our economy, and so let's be on the lookout and see what that's going to do to your business. Now, a downturn. Truth of the matter is for most of us, downturn's a big word. But here's the harsh reality. The last term that we had, a lasting recession, and I'm not going to say the pandemic was a lasting recession. That was a shock and awe that was also heavily subsidized by our government, which I feel sorry for the people that were in restaurants or restaurant supplies and maybe children's activities because those things got eviscerated. But also to another extent, it was the most heavily subsidized downturn the world has ever seen. Not just our country, not just you has ever seen. It's the most heavily subsidized the world has ever seen. So with that said, let's push it aside. The next recession that we had was the Great Recession, which started in 2008 and kind of stopped in 2010. So the Great Recession stopped 15 years ago, right? We've had some bumps in the road since then, but no real deep recession, primarily because we've been flooding our economy with all kinds of liquidity. With that said, though, I want you to step back and look at your leadership team. How many people have been in leadership for 20 years or more? That's becoming a very rapidly declining number because it takes over 20 years since your team has likely really managed through a total economic downturn. Your business may have gone through a downturn, your vendors may have gone through a downturn, and maybe your customers. But the economy as a whole, that's over 15 years ago. So it means that people in your leadership team need to have been in leadership roles for at least 20 years before they've really seen a downturn. And most of y'all are not there because that's a really long time. So what that says is it's highly likely that your leadership team does not know how to prepare for it, manage through a downturn other than just sheer knee-jerk reactionary of let's make cuts. Let's avoid that. Cuts are painful. They're painful for you, painful for the company. Most importantly, they're very painful for your people that depend on you. So why is it that companies struggle when there's uncertain recessions? For the most part, they don't see it coming, and they lack predictive tools or health indicating key performance indicators. If you don't have KPIs that really tell you the health of your business, the health of your balance sheet, the health of your cash flow, the health of your liquidity, then you have a problem. More importantly, as we talked about in the other ones, there's some predictive analytics from ITR that help you understand where you are in your growth, decline, phase cycles. It's hugely important. Go back and look at some of those videos because it's something we do with all of our clients. And in fact, we do it also with a lot of Vistage chairs that help them assess the health of their members. The others is the average entrepreneur. They don't really understand their balance sheet and they don't know what a healthy or weak balance sheet looks like. I actually had a prospect at one point in time. We were talking about, hey, look, to assess what we need to do, we're going to need to see your balance sheet. And this gentleman says, oh, we don't have a balance sheet. I was like, oh my gosh, this person doesn't even understand that they even have two of the required financial statements that everybody has. Their CPA has never talked to them about their balance sheet. And I will tell you that your balance sheet is actually the most important financial statement that you have. So here's the interesting fact. The average entrepreneur spends 85 to 90% of their time looking at their P&L. And that's usually their top line, their EBITDA, maybe their gross margin percent. Frequently, it's not a whole lot more than that. And then the other 10% they spend looking at their balance sheet, which is typically what's going on with my cash, what's my AR, and what's my AR aging, who's past due. And that's about it. They might look at AP, but that's rare. Which is interesting because it contrasts sharply with what a CPA does who's trained to know and analyze and know what a good balance sheet and income statements are. Your CPA, your auditor, they will spend 90% of their time on your balance sheet. Why is that? Good question. Here's the reason why. If your balance sheet is not correct, then your income statement is not correct. If you got junk in your balance sheet, it's junk that should have flushed through your income statement a long time ago, and it didn't. Which means you've been looking at your income statement that is incorrect because there's trash on your balance sheet that you're not seeing. So making sure you have a clean balance sheet and understanding what a healthy balance sheet is critically important. If your controller, if your CPA, if your accountant isn't helping you on that, get that help most desperately. Because to build a healthy balance sheet takes time. It's not an overnight event. It's going to take 6, 9, 12 months, sometimes longer, to build back a healthy balance sheet because it gets into the total operations of your business and accumulating resources to rebuild for a healthy balance sheet. The other one is they really don't have a plan of action. They react versus acting to a plan of action. Very different. So we're going to talk about downside planning. And that doesn't mean you need to implement it. What it means is you need a good plan that you put up on the shelf, you bring that down and re-examine ever so often to determine, is it now time to implement this? And how you know if it's time to implement it, You should have key metrics, right? Always key metrics. We're a big fan of key metrics. And targets that says, hey, if we hit X on this metric, we're going to do Y. If we hit Z on this metric, we're going to do 2, 3, and 4 plans. It's a staged plan of action that you need to have ready to go. Lastly, and this is the most dangerous because we're all humans, is your ability and my ability to rationalize it's okay is huge. Especially for entrepreneurs because we're very positive, people that believe in the future, and sometimes that means we have on our rose-colored glasses. Rose-colored glasses are not good for business planning. You can rationalize your way into a whole bunch of problems. And yes, when it comes down to it, time equals cash, and cash is king. So don't rationalize, because every time you rationalize, you're delaying decisions that should be made now, you're burning cash that you will need later, and it'll create big problems down the road. Other than that, I have no problems with rationalizing. For all of y'all out there, as we go through this, I will recommend this book because it's very, very good. One of its key concepts is the dumb tax. And let's just back up and help to paint this picture. What is the most costly mistake that you've ever made in business that you could have avoided if you educated yourself and dove deeper into the facts? That mistake is called your dumb tax. In fact, I love this saying that comes out of the book. It says, I don't need to do more smart things. I just need to do fewer dumb things. And I need to avoid making those emotional decisions and swinging at bad pitches. I highly encourage this book because what it also talks about is thinking time, how to remove yourself from the day-to-day activities and set aside time to engage your brain in the problems that are to vet, assess, and plan accordingly. It's a great book. You'll thank me for this, if nothing else. So this goes back to our rose-colored glasses and one of my favorite proverbs. Listen to advice and accept instructions that you may gain wisdom in the future. The rose-colored glasses comes from we're very positive people. Sometimes we rationalize our own positive. But what also happens is we shut out the voices that are trying to lean in and says, you're not as healthy as you think, right? You need to take actions to avoid a bigger problem. And the more that we use our rose-colored glasses versus taking them off and looking at reality, the more likely it is that we delay those decisions. With delayed decisions, we burn through resources, which only makes the recovery and the actions that you have to take more painful and deeper. This is not a good situation. So when we talk about downside planning, this is probably the best indicator of reactions that I get from most mid-market CEOs. Like, oh, geez, here comes a big dark cloud hanging over my head with all the negatives. That's not it at all. Downside planning may end up being the most strategic thing, most positive thing, most growth enabling thing that you will ever do, right? Because if you're really strong when other people are weak, your ability to gobble up market share, talent, assets, companies very cheaply is tremendous. But it's only if you're planning and can measure and anticipate when downsides are coming that you can do that. Now, if you don't do any of that, and you just wait for it to happen and you react to it, then yeah, you're going to look like this young lady. Oh my gosh, we have got to take tough actions. Don't be this young lady. Be prepared to take actions in a disciplined way. If you didn't do the planning, then you're probably going to get into this endure mode. And endure modes means you're going to be cutting discretionary expenses, costs, and people. People last in, first out. Whoever came in last, you got to be gone, which I really consider a huge ethical problem. If you're not understanding where you are in your own cycle and you hire 3 or 4 people that you end up cutting 6 months later, you're actually removing them from opportunities that they had elsewhere, right? They said yes to you and no to somebody else. They could have said yes to somebody else if you were ahead of this curve and says, you know what? We see some headwinds. We're not going to hire like we thought we were. So I believe we owe it to these people to make sure that they're making good informed decisions and we remove ourselves from their opportunities if and when needed. And one of the biggest balancing deals is realign revenue with head. If you go too long and you wait too long to make the cuts, your cuts are going to be huge. Versus just saying, hey, you know what? Let's just pause. Let's pause hiring. Let's have a hiring freeze. Maybe let attrition take its course and slowly mute things down, because when you start cutting, you're affecting people and you're affecting your culture. Comp reductions is another one of the big things that we do during the endure phase. String out vendors, harass customers, and what you're doing there is you're signaling to everybody in your marketplace that you're in trouble, and you better hope that everybody else is signaling the same thing, because otherwise you're putting up the red flag of engagement relative to everybody else they're talking to, only because you were not as prepared. Now let's flip that for a second. Let's say all your competitors are calling in, stringing out vendors, harassing customers, and you're not, right? Your ability to strike a good deal with a vendor when everybody else is not treating them well, and you are, you will get great terms if you're the one that has the capacity to treat them well. Just food for thought. And then requesting line of credit expansions or infuse your own capital. While I guarantee when you're struggling, the probability of your bank expanding your line of credit is zero. In fact, the old euphemism is banks are notorious for asking to have their umbrella back as soon as it starts raining. And unless you're willing to give up a huge chunk of your ownership, asking new capital to come in when you're distressed is a tough way to go. Here's the real issue about waiting too long or not planning for a downside. It's like the soldiers in The Wizard of Oz. Oh, we loathe the old one. And in this case, you're the old one, right? You're going to make harsh decisions because of failure to plan now makes the actions much more punitive, much more pervasive, and you're affecting people. And I will guarantee you, for most people, they want a good people-centric culture, but when you start deploying these tactics and you haven't prepared, you will destroy that culture, right? It's really tough to recover from that, because you're going to have some level of brand damage because of the impacts you're going to have on people, and people will talk to other people. I will guarantee it. So planning sustains culture. It ensures your brand is not affected in the marketplace. Now, when done well, in the expand mode, you can anticipate when these headwinds are coming. You can anticipate maybe when you're heading towards a recession economically or for your company individually, and you can prepare. It'll help you to expand. When really done well, over a couple of cycles, you can get into explode. Boy, Warren Buffett is Mr. Explode himself. He is outstanding of anticipating the ebbs and flows in the economy and his companies, conserving resources and using those conserved resources just to attack like nobody else. So, his old adage is he likes to invest when there's blood in the streets. So you may recall when he was going through the Great Recession, he lent Bank of America $5 billion because he planned and had cash set aside, and it was almost virtually guaranteed that he was going to have a phenomenal return on that $5 billion because the bank was desperate and he wasn't. The bank had no capital and he did. They were cutting in panic mode. He was sitting there in a power position. So he was able to explode his own and Berkshire Hathaway's net worth during that period of time. But because he was patient and was willing to plan and had triggers for his own actions. Did you know that in May of 2025 that Berkshire Hathaway had $355 billion set aside that they had harvested from investments as a war chest that says there's not good enough investments out there to deploy this cash? But what does it also say about what he sees about coming up in the future? And if he's willing to build his balance sheet with that kind of liquidity, what should your balance sheet look like? What should your preparedness look like? What does your war chest look like? Is it strong enough to just endure, or are you going to be one of the folks that can expand and explode? That's up to you, and hopefully up to us to help you on that. So I don't know if you remember the movie War Games, and for y'all that don't, it's Matthew Broderick's other famous movie. So right behind Ferris Bueller's Day Off, War Games, which I think was made 2 or 3 years ahead of that, was his other famous movie. I loved the movie. It was fantastic. But if you watch the movie, I want you to watch it with a business person's eye about preparing for and reacting to big events, right? So in this deal, the general, he's the head of NORAD. And as you watch the movie, yes, they go through these fake wars, but in NORAD, you'll see that they have a planned way of monitoring what's the conditions of the global environment, of their environment, and a planned stage of what they're going to do as we go from DEFCON 4 down to DEFCON 1, right? At each stage, they have triggered events. In fact, DEFCON is a triggered event. As it moves, it triggers something else, and they implement that phases. As it moves to DEFCON 3, then to DEFCON 2, they have predefined what they're going to do. Have you predefined what you're going to do? Do you have your metrics that says, okay, we're fine at DEFCON 4, but we suddenly hit DEFCON 3 and we're into at least heightened awareness. DEFCON 2, we're taking serious actions. DEFCON 1 is war, right? But in this movie, you'll see that they move through each one of these stages with predetermined events that we're going to do. Yes, there's panic in the movie, which is half the entertainment. And you're going to find out that Whopper, being their computer trying to assimilate these war games, is a really great deal. I love the movie. You can tell by just looking at me. But it is a great role model for how your business should work in monitoring and reacting to stress and decline. One of the things that you'll find about is most entrepreneurs love revenue. They love their revenue. They love more of their revenue. That's not always a good thing. So revenue, as we always say, as it says right here, not all revenue is created equally. There's some revenue that's bad revenue, it's low margin, and it's highly volatile, and it may have large executional risk. Right? There's other revenue that's high margin, it's on a repeatable long-term contract, very sustainable. That's fantastic revenue. So sometimes it's the smaller revenues that are worth more than the big revenues. So a part of the planning that we want you to go through is to critically assess your revenues and determine which one of your revenues is most valuable. Like when you're at the end of the storm and you're coming out of the storm, what do you want your company to look like? Which revenues do you want to make sure survive? If you were to rebuild your company around just 2 of your 4 revenues, which ones would those be and why? In my previous company, I owned a construction company. Big, lumpy revenues that were based on projects, right? I did commercial construction. So what happened when recession hit? All those projects went away. My lumpiness of revenue eviscerated overnight, and I was left with, only 20% of my revenues were left? And that's a big change. But if I would have had service revenues instead of project revenues, it wouldn't have changed nearly as much, because the service revenues are still services and revenues that my customers need. Project revenues, we can cut that, we're going to defer it, we're going to postpone it, we're going to eliminate it. So looking at the value and qualitative nature of your revenues is really the first and most critical thing to do. Which one of those things creates margins that are lasting and sustainable is the filter that you really want to get into. So one of the ways that you can do that is looking at the Boston Consulting Group matrix, growth and share matrix. It's just one of many ways to look at your revenue streams. But in this deal, they look at market share, high to low, and then market growth, high to low. So market share, we have our cash cows. Very high market share, but low growth. These things have been long-term systemic lines of businesses that just produce money. They're not going anywhere, either up or down, but they just produce money. Our stars are things that, these are great margins, good market share, and fast growing. Those are the things that we want to make sure survive when our company is through the recession. Question marks? Golly. Maybe high growth, maybe not. Maybe growing shares, but you need to critically examine those and determine which ones have the greatest opportunities of being your next at the end of the recession. And everything that's not there are dogs. You need to liquidate those, sell them. Hopefully, if you can identify your dogs early and the shift in the recession or your headwinds early enough, you can still sell those at a good premium or at some level being able to sell them versus just shutting them down. There's different metrics that we look at as well. We will use one in which we look at how well does something align with your core values, your vision, your mission, and its ability to align with your core capabilities, right? We're not looking at revenue streams that depend on future capabilities. We're looking at revenue streams that align with your ability that you are already a master at, no risk whatsoever. And then along the x-axis, we will look at and grade out what is the risk of those items and the speed to which they produce results. From that, we can kind of grade out either the revenues or the initiatives to create new revenues that we really want to invest in. And it allows us on the lower left-hand side of that chart, if you will, to say not now or no. Or really, very similar to like the dogs, let's cut this thing, let's sell it, let's get out of it, and hopefully sell that dog to one of our competitors who's going to have to deal with the dog later on. We'd be delighted to help you do this kind of assessment about your businesses, your revenue streams, your vulnerability, so that at least you have a checkpoint about which ones you're going to examine more closely when the headwinds really hit your way. Now, getting to moving from expand to explode, or from endure into expand and explode, it's hard work, right? It's hard work. There's no easy way to say this. But the work is made a lot easier when you have a plan. Now, one thing that we always encourage is you need to have that plan well before you get there, right? Because your ability to rationalize when you're in the war is huge. But if you develop that plan in advance and you says, hey, when we hit this metric, we're going to take that action. This metric, we're going to take this action. You're now implementing what you see in war games. It's hard work still, but at least you know the hard work is well planned versus knee-jerk reactionary stuff that you hope is enough and works out. It's really important because to agree to something before the stress happens ensures that you can make good rational decisions when the stress is upon you. And then lastly, yes, you need to keep on critically examining your deals. You define, you measure, you analyze. As long as you have the plan, your plan is not going to be perfect. But if you use this virtuous loop, you will come through this thing so much better than you ever thought possible. So here's what we suggest. And this is the approach that we take. Rigorously assess your financial 3-year diagnostic situation. How are you doing? We use ITR. We also stress each line of business about how it would likely react in a downturn. Critically evaluate where you have vulnerabilities. Either the structure of your revenues are vulnerable, or those marketplaces are vulnerable, or that region that you just started is vulnerable. The next one, the third one, is very, very critical. Define in advance the metrics and the trigger levels that will determine when you take action. And when you hit those, don't rationalize it. Go ahead and take the action, right? You may wait for maybe a little bit more data, but don't wait long because you are slipping into a slippery slope of delaying, and you can never recover tomorrow the cash you should have saved today. And this is the next one's where our role comes in. Find a good trusted partner that will tell you when the king has no clothes on, that will tell you, it's like, I hear your great story, I hear your elevator pitch, but right now that doesn't apply, and we need to take action. Now that could be a fractional CFO, it could be another fractional executive, it could be a long-term mentor of yours, it could be your Vistage, Convene, or C12 chair. All of those are great resources, but have a trusting relationship that you're willing to listen to when they say, hey buddy, hey young lady, the king has no clothes on and it's time to take action. Next is you got to build that plan of action and stress test it. Don't just build it, stress test it. It says what happens if it's 10% down, 15%, 25%, or in my case, I ended up percent down. It was painful. There's no way I planned for 80% down, but if I would have planned for 25, 35, 50% down, I would have mitigated a whole bunch of problems before I ever got there. And as you go through this, what's really important is you need to determine what size of war chest do you need to survive that? What does your capital need to look like to survive that? And then what capital do you need to really explode out of that? Those are two different buckets of capital. I need my survival bucket, right? So I make sure that I can weather the storm and weather it well without making the cuts that really eliminate my capacity to compete in the future. And then my second war bucket is my attack bucket. Everybody else in panic mode, I know what's going on. I'm going to go hire your best people. I'm going to go buy cheap assets that are pennies on the dollar. I'm going to go buy competitors. Or I'm going to price some of my competitors out of the market on deals that we're both competing on. All these are great strategies if you plan ahead. Here's just a quick recap of the ITR. We've done some very detailed presentations on this, so I encourage you to go back and look at that. Or, just as important, go to ITR's website, I think it's itreconomics.com, and start looking into their processes. If you're in Vistage, you know about ITR are great, and I'm a big fan of the whole process and everything else. If you're not in Vistage, and this is news to you, then get on their website ASAP. In fact, this chart they will refresh every month, so you can see not only where possibly your industry stands, but you can also see where your customers' industries stand. Because I'll tell you, as go your customers, you will soon go too. So keep that in mind as you're assessing your situation and where to go about making sure you're prepared. Now, this is a lot to swallow, and I could go on for hours, which would bore maybe most of y'all to death, so I'm not going to do that. So if any of this resonates, the need to prepare a plan, the risk of uncertainties that we talked about up front, reach out to us. We're happy to spend an hour or so with you just to vet some of your concerns. And if there's a need for additional insider services, of course, we're happy to do that too. So as we leave today, I'll just ask you, what's your next move? Do you really have a plan on your own? Are you going to develop a plan? Do you know what your headwinds look like? If not, give us a call, hit our contact buttons on our website, and let's spend some time together. With that, I hope you have a great day and you take care.